Each and every one of us has a philosophy. Either we have consciously thought through and intentionally adopted the principles of our philosophy, or we have simply not thought about it and consequently adopted by default the philosophy designed by someone else as demonstrated by how we act. Now, there are different historical traditions of philosophy that grow and develop over time, sometimes completely separate from each other, sometimes aware of and borrowing from each other, and sometimes in opposition to each other. One of these philosophical traditions that has grown and developed fairly consistently over the last 5 centuries has been labeled by historians as liberalism or modernism. This tradition, arising out of the Enlightenment period, is a real collection of assumptions and a resulting way of life for how people live. These are, by the way, assumptions shared by most Americans currently on both the right and left of the political spectrum. This means that historically and strictly speaking, both today's Republicans and Democrats are liberals. Republicans could just be fairly characterized as classical liberals, and Democrats could more accurately be called progressive liberals, both again sharing a set of commonly held propositions. That Enlightenment liberalism entered history, and that its major proponents began to argue for certain ideas about human beings and for the adoption of these ideas in order to create specific types of government and society, is a fact about the world in which we live now in the year 2025. Patrick J. Deneen has helped define liberalism from this perspective as, quote, most fundamentally constituted by a pair of deeper anthropological assumptions that give liberal institutions a particular orientation and cast. 1, anthropological individualism and a voluntarist conception of choice, and 2, human separation from and opposition to nature. These two revolutions in the understanding of human nature and society constitute liberalism inasmuch as they introduce a radically new definition of liberty. End quote. Classical liberalism can be said to have arisen primarily from the Enlightenment philosophers. Today, let's briefly look at some of the most basic biographical facts of the top 20 of the leading philosophers of the Enlightenment. Number 1, Thomas Hobbes, English, born 1588, died 1679, never married, no children, published Leviathan in 1651. Number 2, René Descartes, French, born 1596, died 1650. Never married. Got a servant maid pregnant in 1634, and even though he declined to marry her, lived with her briefly when she gave birth to a daughter in 1635. Published his Discourse on the Method in 1637. His daughter died at the age of 5 of scarlet fever in 1640. Number 3, John Locke, English, born 1632, died 1704. Never married, no children. Published an essay concerning human understanding in 1689. Taught, in his writings on how to raise children, that a child's asking for something is presumptively a reason to not give that thing to the child. Locke further taught on the care of infants, explaining that parents should work to preserve the freedom of the will of babies from being corrupted by the demands of the stomach and therefore that mothers should never feed a baby at the same time on successive days, so as to not risk the baby's being enslaved to a routine or habituated to demands of hunger. Locke defined marriage as a voluntary contract between a man and woman consisting chiefly in such a communion and right in one another's bodies, and that it ought to last even after procreation, so long as is necessary to the nourishment and support of children, till they are able to shift and provide for themselves. Locke then asked why marriage could not then be terminated, either by consent or at certain time or upon certain conditions, just as any other voluntary contract is normally terminated at the will of the contracting parties. Number 4. Barut Spinosa, Portuguese Jewish Dutch, born 1632, died 1677. Never married, no children. Published his Tractatus Theologico-Politicus in 1670. Number 5. Baron de Monscu, French, born 1689, died 1755. Married Jeanne de Lartigue in 1715, and by all the evidence stayed happily married to her for his lifetime. Had 3 children, 2 daughters and 1 son. Uncharacteristically for an Enlightenment philosopher, Montesquieu wrote, quote, "Everything that has to do with the nature of marriage, such as the form of marriage, the manner in which it is contracted, and the reproduction of the offspring that it brings, falls within the jurisdiction of religion." Number 6. Voltaire, French, born 1694, died 1778. Never married, no children. Published his Philosophical Dictionary in 1764. Had a 16-year adulterous affair with a married mother of 3 children. Then had an extramarital affair with his own niece. Number 7. Emanuel de Chatel, French, born 1706, died 1749. Had an arranged marriage when she was 18 years old in 1725 to a 34-year-old husband. Had 3 children, one of whom died as an infant. Published her Foundations of Physics in 1740. Engaged in a 16-year-long adulterous affair with the philosopher Voltaire. Began a second adulterous affair in 1748, which led to another pregnancy. She died 6 days after giving birth to a daughter, who then also died months later. Number 8. David Hume, Scottish, born 1711, died 1776. Never married, no children. Published a treatise on human nature in 1740. Number 9. Denise Dero, French, born 1713, died 1784. Friend of JeanJacques Rouso. Lived a bohemian existence from the 1730s to the 1740s. Married in 1743 and had 1 daughter who survived into adulthood. Published 1 novel in 1748 about a sultan with a magic ring that coerced a woman's privates to magically speak about that woman's sexual experiences against the will and to the embarrassment of the woman. Published a 2nd novel in 1780 about Catholic lesbian nuns. Was unfaithful to his wife and had at least 4 long-term extramarital affairs. Number 10. JeanJacques Rouso, born 1712, died 1778. In 1732, at the age of 20, he began an extramarital affair with a married woman. In 1745, he began a sexual relationship with a seamstress named Thérèse Levasseur. After she became pregnant with his first son, they began living together. After she gave birth to each of his 5 children, Rousseau coerced Thérèse into giving each baby up to an orphanage, as he put it, quote, for the sake of her honor, end quote. Justifying this, Rousseau later wrote, quote, I trembled at the thought of entrusting them to a family ill brought up, to be still worse educated. The risk of the education of the foundling hospital was much less, end quote. Rousseau published The Social Contract in 1762. Eventually agreed to a supposedly civil marriage ceremony with Thérèse in 1768, but only under a fake name. Among other Enlightenment ideas, Rousseau advocated that babies should never be swaddled, because that would be a violation of their liberty. Rousseau advocated, quoting the Comte de Buffon, instead of swaddling, that babies would best be kept in holes dug in the dirt, where they would be close to Mother Nature and have freedom of movement. Rousseau considered marriage to be an example of social contract, which, he argued, must be freely dissoluble if it is really a free expression of love. Number 11, Adam Smith, Scottish, born 1723, died 1790. Never married, no children. Published The Wealth of Nations in 1776. Number 12, Emanuel Kant, German, born 1724, died 1804. Never married, no children. Published The Critique of Pure Reason in 1781. Defined marriage as the consensual contractual exchange of property rights between 2 adults of the opposite sex and the exclusive and mutual use of each other's sexual organs. Number 13, Anne Robert Jacques Turggo, French, born 1727, died 1781. Never married, no children. Turggo famously criticized the American state constitutions for not placing sole government power in a single unicameral legislature, thereby provoking John Adams' 3-volume A Defense of the Constitutions of the Government of the United States of America, defending separation of powers and checks and balances, and influencing the American Constitutional Convention. Number 14, Thomas Payne, English, born 1737, died 1809. Married Mary Lambert in 1759, who tragically died while in childbirth, along with their child, in 1760. Married Elizabeth Olive in 1771. Legally separated from Elizabeth in 1774. Emigrated to the American colonies in later 1774. Had no other romantic relationships and no other children. Number 15, the Marquis de Condors, French, born 1743, died 1794. At the age of 42, he married a 21-year-old in 1786. Had 1 daughter born in 1790. In January 1794, his wife filed for divorce with his consent while he was in hiding during the French Revolution's reign of terror. Imprisoned in 1794, committed suicide before he could be guillotined. Number 16, Jeremy Bentham, English, born 1747, died 1823. Never married, no children. published his An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation in 1789. At the heart of his philosophy, Bentham wrote, quote, "Pleasure is in itself a good, nay, even setting aside immunity from pain, the only good." Number 17, Olympe de Go French, born 1748, died 1793, was married against her will at the age of 17, gave birth to her only son the next year in 1766, the same year her husband died. Began and maintained an extramarital affair with a French businessman shortly after her husband's death. Published The Necessity of Divorce in 1790. Was guillotined by French revolutionaries in November 1793 for opposing the Robespierre faction. Number 18, Maximilian Robosphere, French, born 1758, died 1794. Never married, no children. After advocating for the execution by guillotine of countless aristocrats and political opponents, Robespierre attempted suicide while being arrested and was then executed by guillotine. Number 19, Mary Wilstoncraft, English, born 1759, died 1797. Began living with an American man in Paris during the French Revolution in 1793. She considered their relationship to be one of free love. He then left her shortly after she gave birth to a daughter in May of 1794 so that he could live with a younger actress. She pursued the father of her baby, begging him to stay with her, and when he refused, she tried to commit suicide on 2 separate occasions. Wollstonecraft began a free love relationship with anarchist philosopher William Godwin in 1796. Despite Godwin having advocated for the abolition of marriage, he agreed to marry her after she became pregnant, and they were married in March of 1797. Wollstonecraft died that same year, 11 days after giving birth to her second daughter. Number 20, John Stuart Mill, English, born 1806, died 1873. Married Harriet Taylor in 1851. No children. Summarized the project of Enlightenment liberalism and individualism with his essay On Liberty, published in 1859. In this work, Mill proposed what is known as the harm principle, writing that the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. Mill also wrote, quote, "The despotism of custom is everywhere the standing hindrance to human advancement, being an unceasing antagonism to that disposition to aim at something better, which is called the spirit of liberty, or that of progress or improvement. The progressive principle, however, in either shape, whether as the love of liberty or of improvement, is antagonistic to the sway of custom, involving at least emancipation from that yoke, and the contest between the two constitutes the chief interest of the history of mankind." In summary, out of the top 20 Enlightenment philosophers, 12 never married, 3 had children outside of marriage, only 5 had children within marriage. The Enlightenment philosopher with the greatest number of children was JeanJacques Rouso, even though he arranged not to have them for long. Only one of these 20 philosophers, Baron de Montesquieu, had a long-lasting and happy marriage with children. Montesquieu was also arguably the one Enlightenment philosopher who had the greatest influence upon the American constitutional system of government of federalism, separation of powers, and checks and balances, except perhaps for Turggo, who influenced it in the reverse. These are the men and women collectively responsible for creating the vast majority of the principles of classical liberal modernism regarding the proper governing of individuals, families, and communities. Many of our own modern assumptions about life and knowledge, about family and the individual, and about culture and law were designed by these philosophers. Are these biographical facts good reason to reject the ideas of these philosophers? Not at all. The truth of any idea or principle does not depend upon the identity of the person who speaks it. Do these biographical facts provide evidence of the personal experience and knowledge of these philosophers? Yes. As a whole, it appears many of them lived consistently with their principles at the practical day-to-day level. The question for us is, do we wish to do the same and follow in their example? Speaking for myself and my family, I hope the answer is no.